Good afternoon. It is so nice to see everyone, and I just want to thank you for joining us. I am Deborah Miller, the JCRC's Director of Maryland Government and Community Relations. Before we begin, I want to let everybody know that this program is being recorded. I'm thrilled to welcome all of you to the first of our three-part Maryland legislative series, Legislatively Speaking. While we had hoped to gather in person this year at our annual legislative breakfast, we decided it was safer and smarter to hold this event online once again. The JCRC, as you know, serves as the public affairs and community relations arm of the Maryland, Northern Virginia, and DC organized Jewish community, home to over 300,000 Jews. The agency represents more than 100 organizations, synagogues, and the Jewish Federation in advocating for the needs and values of the Jewish community, along with the well-being of everyone in the greater Washington region. This year, we're kicking off our Legislatively Speaking series with a discussion of our priorities at both the state and county level. And we are so excited to be joined by State Delegate and House Majority Leader Eric Luedtke, as well as Montgomery County Council Vice President Gabe Albornoz. After we hear from our elected officials about the issues that are critical to them and to us in the upcoming year, our Executive Director, Ron Halber, will moderate a discussion. Please put your questions in the Q&A box and he will try to get to as many as possible. Without further ado, let me introduce Bobby Schulman and Todd Rosenberg, who serve as our co-chairs of the JCRC Maryland Commission. Not only are Bobby and Todd a wonderful resource to me, but they are passionate about many issues facing our community today. Bobby, it's all yours.
Thanks, Deborah. It's my pleasure to introduce our Maryland House Majority Leader, Delegate Eric Luedtke. I was worried about the last name and I just stumbled over the first name. Anyway, Delegate Luedtke represents District 14. He is a Montgomery County resident who was raised by his single mother in Gaithersburg. He graduated from Wooten High School and the University of Maryland College Park, where he studied government and history. After college, Delegate Luedtke spent a decade teaching history in Montgomery County Public Schools, working closely with students who lack access to adequate food, healthcare, and housing. The experience motivated him to re-engage with advocacy. And in 2010, seeing a chance to make a difference, he ran for the Maryland House of Delegate, and he has been Majority Leader since 2019. Delegate Luedtke serves on the Ways and Means Committee and chairs its Revenue Subcommittee. He is passionate about advocating for families, businesses, and students of Montgomery County and from across the state. He is a clinical professor in the School of Public Policy at University of Maryland, College Park. He lives in Ashton with his wife, Dawn, and their 4 children. And we are so grateful that Delegate Luedtke's deep commitment to our community and the priorities for which we advocate. And we welcome you. And for the next 10 minutes or so, we would really be very appreciative if you would speak about the priorities of the 2022 legislative sessions, about your priorities.
Sure, I'm happy to. And first of all, thank you for inviting me. Thank you to Deb and Ron and Bobby and Todd and everyone at the JCRC for putting this on. It's always great to have opportunities to get feedback and questions about what's on people's minds. We, as you can imagine, in the legislature over the last couple of years have been very, very busy in responding to the challenges of the pandemic. But not only the challenges of the pandemic, but the inequities that the pandemic brought into such stark contrast, and the inequities in the criminal justice system that were highlighted by the Black Lives Matter protests and the murder of George Floyd. So, you know, we are entering this coming legislative session still in the midst of the COVID pandemic. The pandemic's not over yet, and that challenge of responding adequately to it is guiding a lot of our work. So there are a number of issues that have come up in the state that I think are going to be high on the radar screen this year in Annapolis. One of them is childcare. We've seen tremendous challenges with folks getting access to affordable childcare. I know this is an issue also that Councilmember Albornoz is very passionate about. One of our Montgomery County colleagues, Jared Solomon, has been spearheading conversations about how to expand access to childcare, both by helping people who are interested in starting new childcares get off the ground, helping existing childcare businesses expand slots, and also helping low-income folks access the state subsidies for childcare more effectively and efficiently and more quickly. It's important from multiple perspectives. On the one hand, it's really important for families to be able to access childcare, but interestingly, the business community in Annapolis has pegged childcare as one of their biggest challenges. And so, the Maryland Chamber of Commerce is standing alongside liberal organizations and advocating for some of these bills. So that will definitely be something we'll be addressing. There are other pandemic-related issues like housing that are going to continue to be major topics of conversation. For example, we passed legislation this past legislative session to give people a right to counsel in eviction cases, but there isn't enough funding to provide enough lawyers to assist people who need help. Another issue is, and this is shocking, a shocking statistic when I share it with people, it costs 4 times as much for a person to file a case if they're a victim of domestic violence and need a protective order, as it does for a landlord to kick somebody out of their house in an eviction case. The cost of eviction cases in Maryland is low compared to the rest of the country. It's led to abuses of the system, which have led to people being kicked out of their housing for owing as little as $5. So, those are issues that we're going to be tackling. Vaughn Stewart, another Montgomery County delegate, and Janelle Wilkins also are taking the lead on some of those housing issues. Beyond the sort of pandemic-related issues, obviously there are going to be other major issues on the agenda. Our Environment and Transportation Committee and the Senate Environment Committee are working on a major piece of climate change-related legislation to take the next step in putting Maryland on a path towards a clean and renewable future, including new standards for reduction in energy use in major commercial buildings. We saw just yesterday the hearing in the Supreme Court regarding a woman's right to choose. And Maryland is one of the states that already has law protecting reproductive freedom, but we have legislators looking at ways we can strengthen those rights in Maryland to make sure that women continue to have the ability to make their own choices about their own bodies in healthcare. And then, we saw earlier this week as well another horrific mass shooting at a school. And, unfortunately, we've gotten to the point as a country where these types of frankly, terrorist acts, and they are terrorist acts, have become all too normalized in our society. Maryland is strong on gun safety legislation, but one of the loopholes in our laws right now is our failure to adequately regulate ghost guns. Ghost guns are guns that are created sometimes through 3D printing technology, other sources that don't necessarily have serial numbers, and that criminals are using to commit crimes. So Leslie Lopez, another legislator from Montgomery County, has been working hard to try to close that loophole and make sure Maryland addresses ghost guns. And of course, there are dozens of other issues that will be on the agenda during any given legislative session. We hear nearly 3,000 pieces of legislation and consider them in 90 days. So you can imagine if there's any issue that you are concerned about, it will show up at some point on the radar screen, even relatively small ones. I had a bill last year dealing with a tiny little tax credit for donation of venison by deer hunters, right? So we deal with minor stuff, we deal with major stuff. We are always happy to hear from you about what's on your mind. I would encourage JCRC members and folks that participate in JCRC activities to feel free to reach out to your legislators. The easiest way to identify them, if you don't know, is a website, mdelect.net. And if you type your address into that, it will tell you all of your elected representatives, which is a fantastic tool for figuring out who to reach out to, whether you've got a complaint or a kudos. We always love to hear compliments. They're pretty rare in our email, but they happen sometimes. And then finally, I just want to add, we're actually, our regular legislative session starts in January, but we're actually days away from a legislative session. We're having a special legislative session next week. It's going to focus on 3 things. First of all, we are at the end of the decade, or the beginning of a new decade, and we have to redraw our maps for both congressional districts and state legislative districts. And next week, we will be considering our congressional district maps. In addition to that, Governor Hogan vetoed dozens of pieces of legislation that we think are important. So we're going to be having conversations about overriding that legislation. Some of those overrides, I mean, it covers everything from the right of workers to organize and form unions at our community colleges to expanded investments in clean energy and growing the clean energy sector in Maryland. So there will be a whole spate of overrides that happen. And then finally, we'll be electing a new state treasurer. We are in a period of unprecedented turnover in the elected leadership in the state of Maryland. And for the first time in decades, the governorship, the comptrollership, and the treasurership are all open seats right now. In the case of the treasurer, Nancy Kopp, who is from Montgomery County, was originally a delegate from Bethesda, has served the state ably for decades as our state treasurer, has made the decision to retire. And I've known Nancy a long time. I'm not sure anyone could ever fill her shoes. She has been a stalwart for the people of Maryland. But we will be voting on a new treasurer next week. The treasurer is elected by the membership of the General Assembly. And then, of course, next fall, you, the voters, will have the chance to elect a new comptroller and a new governor. So with that, I'll cut short my remarks and turn it over to you all and my friend Gabe, and I look forward to any and all questions.
Todd, I'm going to have you start again because you're muted.
Thank you, Delegate Luedtke. And apologies for the mute issue. I should get Zoom under control by this time in the pandemic. It's now my pleasure to introduce my friend, County Council Vice President Gabe Albornoz, who that's the last time we'll be referring to him by that title, because next week he will become County Council President Gabe Albornoz, and we're very excited about that. Council member Albornoz is a lifelong resident of Montgomery County and is deeply committed to the county, its people, and as a son of immigrant parents, its diversity. He graduated from Montgomery County Public Schools and has dedicated his career to public service and advocating for social policies. Mr. Albornoz was first elected to the council in November 2018 as an at-large member. In addition to serving as the council's vice president, he chairs the Health and Human Services Committee, where he oversees public health and human services that impact children, adults, and seniors in our county. Mr. Albornoz also serves on the Public Safety Committee, where he reviews current policies to maintain transparency and increase the accountability of our public safety departments. Councilmember Albornoz is truly at large, having lived in Gaithersburg, Silver Spring, Bethesda, and now Kensington, where he resides with his wife, Catherine, also a Montgomery County native, and their 4 young children. He graduated from Whitman as a Churchill grad. I'll give him a pass for that. Received his Bachelor of Arts in Communication from the University of Maryland and an MBA from Johns Hopkins. He has been a wonderful friend and advocate for the Jewish community, which is definitely true. Welcome soon to be Mr. County Council President Gabe Albornoz. Could you please spend the next 10 minutes or so highlighting some priorities that you'll be working on in the upcoming months?
Great. Well, Todd, thank you for your friendship and thank you for that introduction, my friend. And Bobby, it's good seeing you as well. I want to first begin by acknowledging and thanking the JCRC. Your work has never been more important than it has been these last 2 years. You have been such a strong partner in helping to make sure we've strengthened our social safety net here in the county and weathered this storm much more effectively than most other jurisdictions have been able to across the country. And it's because of your leadership, the trust, and the remarkable innovation that the organizations you support have shown that we've really done better than most organizations, so communities. So thank you. And it is a privilege and honor to share this Zoom with my good friend, Delegate Luedtke. He is an outstanding member of what I humbly think is the best delegation in the entire state of Maryland. And I've seen many of them over the years, but their progressive leadership, their steadfast leadership, and their partnership and alliance with the county is part of an ecosystem that's critical to service delivery and ensuring that we help take care of the most vulnerable and frankly, just at the end of the day, pursue the common good. So thank you, Eric, for your leadership. As a Terp myself, thank you also for your connection to the University of Maryland, although that didn't help them last night and their loss to Virginia Tech, but that's another story. And I do want to acknowledge Ron Halpert as well and his leadership and his partnership and alliance. We talk often on the phone, as he does with many people, and you're not going to find a stronger advocate on behalf of the Jewish community and really all of Montgomery County, period, than Ron and his team. And I also finally want to acknowledge my friend and colleague Beth Schuman, who works in my office and is often the liaison to JCRC. So with all those acknowledgements to the what's at play here and what's on the docket. So as Delegate Luedtke said, we are not out of the woods. There's another variant on the horizon. And while we've done some really remarkable work to stabilize things here in Montgomery County, we have spent over $30 million, both in county, but also federal resources in addressing food security issues. And we've been able to build off of what was already a pretty strong foundation, thanks to our Food Council, Manna Foods, and many other really great organizations in that space. But that is an area that continues to be an area of need. In fact, the county executive has recently transmitted a request for several million more dollars in order for us to be able to get through the end of the fiscal year. We've also spent over $40 million in rental assistance, which has prevented over 3,700 evictions here in the county. And I'm happy to say that we are at pre-pandemic levels in terms of the level of activity we're seeing with evictions. And so we've really done some heavy lifting there to help address some of those myriad of needs and families that have been in crisis through some of those basic necessities, food and housing, which we've worked really hard to address. We've also worked on helping to support our businesses, and in particular our small local businesses, through a variety of grants and financial support, particularly those businesses that have disproportionately been impacted by the virus, like our hospitality industry and our restaurant sector, which, as we know, is so important, both economically, but also in terms of our overall, sorry about that, here in the community. And we've worked with a number of our specialty populations who have been really disproportionately impacted by the virus. And we've worked with communities that have tremendous advocates, but are not often at the table as important decisions are made. Our office in particular has been very intentional in trying to support our developmental disability community, which has really taken it on the chin over the last 2 years in particular. And the council has, as everyone knows, and we are very proud of, has focused a lot of our time and attention from a racial equity standpoint, and through policy and legislation. Organically, I would like to think that we had conducted our business from a policy perspective through that lens, but it has now been codified in legislation, and I think is producing some really important results that will help us moving forward. So the areas that the council is going to be focusing on in this upcoming year, there are several buckets. Number one is continuing our social services and social safety net to strengthen that and be able to move it forward. Number two is in the area of economic development. We received yet another sobering report yesterday before the council that we've had stagnant growth well over 10 years now, with workforce development that is not keeping pace with our neighboring jurisdictions. And so there is undeniably a need for us to make greater investments and focus more time and energy in that space, because as our economy goes, you can draw a straight line to our social service network. We need the resources that the revenue from a thriving economy brings to be able to address this myriad of other issues that are out there. The third area that we will be focusing on is infrastructure. Thanks to our federal partners, we're going to see record level of investments here in our state, and we will be working with our state delegation to make sure Montgomery County gets its fair share of the federal funding to continue to support the economic engine, undeniably, of the entire state, and to keep it moving and to keep us on pace to be able to, not just at the local level, but at the state level, address a myriad of issues as well. And then finally, the other priority area for this council is going to be in the area of safety and security. We've seen very alarming trends in crime. We know that we work closely with our friends in the Jewish community and others as well to provide security, even the most basic levels, because we are seeing just undeniable hate and anger that is manifesting itself in ways that are truly scary. The issue of gun violence and the proliferation of it is impacting all of us in so many profound ways, and it's disproportionately impacting our Jewish community. That is creating mental health issues, behavioral health issues, and it's something that we clearly have to stay in front of. And we are in a very important moment in the history of our country as we discuss police reform and ensuring that generations of inequity are addressed in a way that's fair and equitable, but also balancing out the need for us to continue to be able to provide the kind of support that our communities desperately need, often disproportionately our minority and ethnic communities. I happen to think we can do both things, and through policy and legislation and coalition building and bridge building, I think we're going to get there. So I'll wrap up with this. Two initiatives that our office is going to be working on this year specifically is, and I'll go back to something I said earlier, we've done a lot of really great work in the food security space. There is no reason, absolutely no reason that we can't end childhood hunger here in Montgomery County. We have the political will, we have the organizations, we have partners at the state and federal level, and there is an opportunity for us to go down that road and in 3 years, effectively eliminate childhood hunger here in our community, which impacts currently at least 40,000 kids who are deemed, who don't know where their next meal is going to come from right now as we speak. So that's something that we're going to be focusing on. And then finally, in the area of public health, which the health and wellness of communities is the foundation of everything. And we've seen with tragic results that are unacceptable, the disproportionality of the impact of the virus on our various communities. That's totally not okay. And something that we have to address through a myriad of ways, and just staying aggressive. And we're going to be focusing on those issues as well. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to the Q&A, and I'll defer back to the team here.
Well, Delegate Luedtke and soon to be Council President Gabe Albornoz, thank you very much. You guys gave really excellent, thorough, bulleted, and analytical presentation, which I think really very clearly laid out what you're focused on. So I'm going to get things started with a couple of questions. I'm Ron Halbert, Director of JCRC. And let me also thank Todd and Bobby for their leadership at JCRC on everything Maryland, Debbie for putting this together and representing us so well, and for a delegate and a council member who we're proud to have as our representatives, who are very effective, forthright, honest, and good people as well. Let me start by asking Delegate Luedtke a question. You're going to have to unmute yourself. You mentioned that that a couple things are going to be happening this session, focusing on congressional and state legislative districts, overriding of legislation, new state treasurer, and then we move into the main session in January. Among the legislation that is going to be overridden, which the Democrats can do, they have the numbers. Are there any within the Democratic caucus that are contentious that might end up not being overridden or are not sort of sure where they're heading? Like, is there any that are sort of teetering on the edge? Can you give us a little insider baseball?
Sure. I mean, on the House side, we have the votes to override every single veto, and we've made our position clear from the beginning from when the vetoes were issued that we're ready to override them. The Senate has a few more challenges in overriding sometimes. So there's the biggest one that I think is a question mark right now in the Senate is a bill that would decriminalize drug paraphernalia. So right now in Maryland, somebody who's a drug addict, for example, can actually get more prison time for being caught with a hypodermic syringe than they can for actually being caught with the drug that they're using, depending on what the charges are, which is unreasonable. And frankly, it criminalizes drug addiction, right? Drug addiction is a health issue. It should be treated in a hospital, not a prison. And so, we passed that legislation overwhelmingly in the House. The Senate, I think, in final passage was 1 vote short of a veto-proof majority. So we'll see if they're able to cobble the majority together to override. But the rest of the legislation, the major legislation, I think is definitely going to go.
Right. Gabe, if you don't mind, I'm going to say I know you both. I'm just going to go by your first names because if I keep remembering calling you Delegate and I'm going to screw up your title at some point, and I'd rather just go by what I speak to you on the phone, if that's okay. Gabe, redistricting. We've spoken about this. Not only is this happening in Annapolis, it's happening in the council. We know that the council last year, the ballot expanded the Montgomery County Council from 5 at-large seats to 7, 5 individual district member seats to 7. We know that Kent Mill was divided in half down Arcola, the last from the observations at the last council hearing. It seems like there's pretty much a consensus that it will remain united. I thank you for your support on that, of course, and for your brethren. And my question is that since most of the Jewish community's institutions lie in Kent Mill, not just the population lie, but the institutions lie, what are the odds do you think that Kent Mill as a whole will not just be reunited, but also remain in District 6, which is the preference of the Jewish community?
Absolutely. Well, first, and Ron, of course you can call me Gabe. You can call me anything you want, my friend. So I appreciate your leadership. So for a little bit of background and context for the audience, and then I'll answer your specific question.
Yeah, please do.
As you indicated, it's been over 34 years since the council has changed its makeup, and yet the county has almost doubled in size since the last time we added council members. So it is appropriate for the council for voters to have voted to take this action. And the good news is that overall, what it will mean is currently each council district has approximately 230,000 residents in it. This will bring that number down to between 170 and 180,000 or so. And so that puts our district council members in an even better position than they are right now to be able to address constituent issues because there'll just be fewer constituents that they will have the opportunity to focus on. I will also say too that the synergy between our at-large council members and our district council members is very important and works quite well. I had a front row seat for 12 years in the Leggett administration and kind of seeing how the county operated. And now I'm on the bench and can see the locker room. And I can tell you that while sausage is definitely made, I've been very impressed with how my colleagues and I have come together. And there are too many instances to count in which district council members will vote for an issue that really does pursue the common good and that underscores the complex issues on things like transportation and other issues that benefit the whole county, and then conversely, their own districts. So
very interesting observation.
So the message overall is a good one for residents. Now, having said that, Ron, you did an amazing job, and so did your team in very clearly and passionately and effectively articulating the unique sets of challenges around Kent Mill as an example. And because we're talking about a community that is so important, but also quite candidly is not particularly large, it gives us more flexibility in making those adjustments as necessary. I give the commissioners that worked on this map a lot of credit. They did it under tough circumstances with moving goalposts and a tough federal administration that was not great a partner in how they derived the census figures. So they weren't entirely flying blind, but man, they were having a hard time. And I thought with all of those things considered, I was pretty impressed with the product that they came up with. So to answer your question, with all of that as context, I think there's a good chance that Kent Mill will stay united and that we're looking at 2 separate scenarios. One of them being the request that they remain mostly in the district that they are in now. And I think that's as was articulated publicly by the council on Tuesday afternoon, that's our preference. And so
In District 6, yes.
Yep, in District 6. Now the staff packet is due to come out any minute now for next week. And so we'll review the various scenarios that Ms. Dunn, who is outstanding and used to work for the planning department, has come up for us. But I saw a preliminary draft of it, and I can tell you that she did a great job in putting all of these pieces together. So I think we'll be able to address these issues in a reasonable fashion.
Gabe, thank you for making a very complex thing easier to understand. People should know out there that redistricting is an extraordinary difficult process where you have to draw every line in every neighborhood to impute a certain amount of populations and to ensure equity and demographic balance, and that it's an incredible puzzle piece. So, I, for one, I'm happy I'm not the one drawing the district lines, and I'm only the one advocating for them. But my compliments to you and the entire council, because it's not an easy thing to do. Eric, I wanted to ask you a question. A lot of people in this country are really, really frightened about the possibility of Roe v. Wade being struck down by the present court. In the event that happens, we don't know whether it could be struck down based on the issue of the time period, or whether the whole fundamental right will be kicked back and sent to the states. I'm not an attorney, but that's the analysis that I've been reading. How do we make sure, I can't believe we're actually discussing this, that we could go back to an era where it would be state by state and poor women and Medicaid funding and all the things that led to the famous picture of a hanger being the anti-abortion symbol. But if it happens, how do we make sure here in Maryland that our population is that women in this state at least have the right to make decisions over their own bodies without interference? And also, any thought to how we can make sure that our state is a place where women from other states can come to get the help they need?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It wasn't in my bio that Bobby read, but the real story of how I got involved in politics originally is my mom. She was active in the women's movement in the 60s and 70s. And actually, when she was pregnant with me, there was a proposal in Prince George's County, where she lived at the time, to locally limit access to reproductive care for women, to abortion services. And she testified against the bill while, I think, 8 or 9 months pregnant with me. So, it's something that, an issue where from an early age I was raised to, this is important. What's happening in the Supreme Court, in my opinion, is a travesty. The court has been stacked now with a set of justices who, frankly, I think are throwing aside precedent and the longstanding traditions of the court and undermining American institutions.
Eric, can I just interject? One person also asked, Jody has asked, similar to what I was talking about, do you think the Abortion Care Access Act of 2022 will pass? That, just as part of your remarks, if you can address that.
Sure, no problem. So the good news, first of all, is that Maryland has long been a leader in protecting a woman's right to choose. In 1990, I believe it was, there was a ballot measure that passed that confirmed in state law a woman's right to choose. As Jody points out, there is legislation in the 22 session that's being championed, I believe, by Ariana Kelly, another Montgomery County legislator, to further extend that right. There is broad support for it in both chambers of the legislature. I think we see it as our responsibility in the face of whatever happens at the Supreme Court to make sure women continue to have the right to make their own choices about their health care. So I would expect that legislation to pass. I mean, never say never, legislative sessions can be messy, but that's a high priority for a lot of us in the legislative session.
Thank you, Gabe. I have a question from our board member, David Weiss, and he's basically asking, he says, are there specific regulatory issues within the county that can be addressed to improve our own position versus neighboring jurisdictions in terms of attracting new business formation investment? That was you were talking about economic and workforce development as your second priority when you were speaking. And, I do hear, because the JCRC covers the entire metropolitan region from Frederick to Fredericksburg, I like to say, and clearly Montgomery County our people in Montgomery County, as you heard in your own report about stagnant job growth, are concerned that if we're going to continue to be a wonderful place, we can't just rely on the quality of our schools alone, but on the fact that we have good paying jobs to offer people to live, so that Montgomery County can remain a good place to live, work, and raise a family. So how do we go about this economic? Is it regulatory, as David said? Is it legal? Is it business? What's the problem here?
Yeah, so let me provide a little bit of context and then give you my take on all of this. And obviously, it's literally the $20 million question. But fundamentally, we have this dream workforce that exists in the county that is a tremendous asset and is not being leveraged in quite the way that it should. There are some disadvantages that we have as compared to neighboring jurisdictions that are difficult for us to overcome. We don't have an airport here, as an example. And while we do have an outstanding institution in the universities of Shady Grove and in Montgomery College, Universities of Shady Grove is a fairly new entity as it relates here to the community. And so a more established four-year college that brings with it all that comes with it is not an asset that we're working on developing, but that we don't have as well. I think that there's been a long-standing impression that Montgomery County is a tough place to do business, in part because of the regulation environment, but also in part because there have been some that felt we have not provided the customer service that we can and should be providing to help our small, medium, and large businesses grow and get what they need, and frankly, get the county out of their way for them to be able to meet their full potential. So with that as background and context, I think there are several areas where we've got a real opportunity. The first is the things that we can control as a county government the most are the things that will attract more people to want to live here. That includes, a nighttime economy. That includes transportation system that's more accessible and that has more options in a variety of different ways and doesn't impact the quality of life. That includes creating more housing options within reason, particularly those around mass transit, so that younger generations of people that want to come back or our kids who have graduated from college and want to come back to the county can find a place that's fun and engaging and where they want to be able to live in. That's something that the county's in control of and needs to do a better job of. The other two areas I would say are in the area of investment. We received a recommendation yesterday before the full council that we do need to more aggressively look at the development of an economic fund that we can use as leverage and to attract more businesses here. When you look at the economic funds that have been establishing in neighboring jurisdictions, including Prince George's County, we have fallen behind and we have rested too much on our overall reputation and have not been as aggressive and as proactive as we should have been all along in attracting businesses here. But
Gabe,
the final thing I'll say is,
Gabe, can I give you one example? There are right now, we have a direct flight from Dulles to Israel. We lobbied very, very hard to make sure that there was a direct flight. There's approximately, I'm not sure the exact number, 30 Israeli businesses in the of which most are headquartered in Montgomery County, and I think there's about 80 in Virginia. So the question is, they get off at Dulles and they have to drive one way. And it's not that far when they get on 495 to say, I'm going to go south to Virginia, or I'm going to go north to Maryland. And there are international places that have pent up capital and are just dying to get into the Washington market. And I'm saying, so not only if some of these things that you talk about, could they be good for domestic investors, but an improvement in our economy can also be a place for international development.
No, you're absolutely right about that. And obviously with NIH being here, our proximity to the federal government, there's a lot of assets that we have right here that we need to develop in our community. And there are also parts of the county, Eric represents one of them, that is ripe for economic development and growth. And it's interesting, whereas folks in Bethesda, neighbors are saying, wait, you're doing too much. This is too much. The folks in the eastern part of the county and in White Oak in particular are saying, please bring it on. We want more economic development growth, and we want all that brings with it to our community. And so we have set the table for investments in those communities. But now we need to do a better job of connecting dots with some of these international businesses that you're referring to, Ron, and make this in partnership with the state an opportunity for us to create more carrots and to really be able to bring more of these businesses in. I think there's a lot that we can and should be leveraging that we are not.
Thank you, Gabe. Eric,
And
we have a
Ron,
question.
let me jump in and just say, maybe
Please
we should
do.
also talk about getting a flight to Israel from BWI now that they're doing international flights out of there to London and Paris. There's no reason why we couldn't.
That's another thing I'll be happy to talk to you about. We'd be happy to do that. We go from embarrassment of losses to an embarrassment of riches would be great.
Yeah.
I have a question from Jane. Eric, can you talk a little bit more about, explain to people what a ghost gun is? I mean, I know what a ghost gun, but if you can explain to people, like, what is a ghost gun? I know Susan Lee is working very hard on the
Yep.
Senate side.
Yep.
And so the question is, can you talk a little bit more about ghost guns, and can you talk a little bit more about any potential storage requirements, legislation for guns for the session in Annapolis? I mean, it's getting to the point when you said it was normal, it's become normalized, this gun. I mean, to me, as a father of three, a husband, a family man, as a resident of Montgomery County, the fact that hearing about, when I get a notification on my phone that I hear somebody, that there's been a mass killing in Michigan, that I look at and go, oh, and that no longer stops me or many other people from going, oh my God, and stopping to think for a moment, is an example about how institutionalized, routinized, and common it's become in American society. I frankly think it's the worst epidemic, and because Americans are numb to it. They're numb. What are we going to do about this?
Yeah, and I mean, just to take a step back, I mean, I worked in a school, so and dealt with the challenges of preparing students for the potential for an attack, and it's horrific to have to sit students down in a corner of a classroom and turn out the lights and play pretend as if somebody's in the building with a gun. And my wife actually works with the Center for School Safety and on hate crimes work and that kind of thing. So she gets notifications in advance of the press when these things happen, and it's heartbreaking. A week doesn't go by where she's not telling me about another shooting at a school somewhere in America. On the gun regulation side, as I said before, Maryland's in a better spot than most states. We do have relatively strict laws about how guns should be stored and kept out of the hands of minors. Frankly, the biggest challenge there is prosecution, right? Prosecutors need to actually prosecute parents that allow their children to have access to guns and commit these crimes. And a lot of prosecutors across the country have shied away from that. That's not happening in the most recent shooting. The most recent shooting, the prosecutor there is going after the parents, as frankly they should, because any gun owner has a responsibility to lock up their guns. Ghost guns are a real challenge because for decades now, our ability to catch criminals and who've committed crimes with guns rests in part on our ability to identify the chain of ownership of a gun through the serial numbers that are on a gun. It is possible using modern technology, 3D printers in particular, to print guns at home with only the purchase of a small subset of parts that can be ordered over the internet to basically make your own gun in your garage. And criminals are aware of this, and they are making these guns. That's what we refer to as ghost guns. They're making these guns that essentially can't be traced, right? It makes it that much harder to catch the bad guys. So Senator Lee and Delegate Lopez have been working actually for a number of years now to try to craft legislation that can make it through the legislature that will crack down on ghost guns. And I'm not on the Judiciary Committee, so I'm not familiar with all of the details, but that's in process. But frankly, another side of this with the school shootings is the school safety side. And a few years ago, we had a shooting here in Maryland. A young woman was murdered in Great Mills High School in St. Mary's County. And it led the legislature to pass important legislation called the Safe to Learn Act, which did all sorts of, it expanded the Maryland Center for School Safety, provided for all sorts of things to try to intervene. But the big missing piece, some of the kids who have committed these attacks are kids that have severe mental illnesses, untreated mental illnesses. And we don't do a good enough job providing mental health care in this country. And we certainly don't do a good enough job providing it to children. So that's the other side to this too, is let's make sure anybody who needs mental health support gets mental health support. And that will also help contribute to a decrease in violence.
And
Thank you,
if
Eric.
I can follow up on that really
Please.
quick, Ron, just
This is why we love doing county and state at the same time, because the interplay is excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to put a fine point on it, a tragically horrific fine point on it. About 3 months ago, there was a shooting in front of Plumgar Community Center in which
Yes.
a 21-year-old young man was killed. The perpetrator of that crime was a 14-year-old boy who used a ghost gun that he had purchased for a very low amount of money from somebody in his community. Over 300 ghost guns have been confiscated in DC alone, and over 70 have been confiscated in Montgomery County just over the last 6 months. This has become the weapon of choice among many of our criminal rings, including gangs, because for all the reasons Eric stated, you can go online right now and download information on how to build these things and just go to the hardware store, get a couple of screws, and you've got yourself a weapon with no serial number. By the way, they're made of plastic or fiberglass, and so they can't be detected by metal detectors. Mm-hmm. And these weapons they have emerged and they actually have semi-automatic capability. These are not just like 2 or 3 little pops. And so it's a huge issue, and we desperately need our federal government here to really step in, because it falls into a gray area of the law. In the county, we passed local legislation to try and use whatever resources that we had and tools that we had to address this through what's called a zone text amendment. But even that is being challenged in the courts by the NRA and by the gun lobbyists, they're called hobbyists, who claim that these guns should be allowed to be made because they're made as hobbies, and obviously they're getting into the wrong hands, and so it's a huge issue, and one that is becoming a bigger one. And I'll note this, which is also scary, and this is a practical reality. Gun sales in Montgomery County since the beginning of the pandemic, legal gun sales in Montgomery County, have increased by almost 40%. 40%.
What do you think's behind that?
I think people are afraid. I think that people feel disoriented, and I think they feel unsafe, and they are significantly overcompensating and not realizing that you are more likely to be shot by your own gun than you are to shoot somebody else. And so it's just a huge challenge. And Eric is absolutely right that it's a complex issue that goes far beyond the weapon itself. And on a holistic level. And let me just say, the behavioral health issues that we're seeing in our school system right now are beyond tragic. I mean, they are overwhelming. I did not touch on this in my opening comments, but the mental health and wellness of our children, youth, and families, but also our teachers who are taking care of them, our parents who are exhausted. And this is hitting every socioeconomic class, but obviously disproportionately ones that are more disadvantaged, is a huge problem. And so we're trying to flood the zone with more case managers, social workers, but it's hard because the recruitment and retention has become a huge issue in that space as well. So I don't want to be overly pessimistic here, because I think that we're starting to see things recede with the pandemic as a whole, but we have to have our eyes wide open on all of these issues because they're all interconnected.
Gabe, quick question. Last year, this is coming from Todd, the state legislature passed police reform. How has it impacted Montgomery County? Has it gone far? Has it accomplished what we needed? Has it gone far enough? Do we need more? Can you talk a little bit about that for a minute or two?
Yeah, so, I have, the county on its own has actually moved forward a number of police accountability bills to help increase transparency, help build back some of the community trust that has been whittling away over generations. But after what occurred with George Floyd and the other tragic and high profile incidents across the country, which frankly have been happening for generations, but now because of the advent of people having a camera on their phone, more of these things are being documented. They're just coming to the surface now in ways that they never were before. But I think the county has tried to set a reasonable course in balancing, ensuring that everyone feels safe and that everyone feels our law enforcement and police department is in a fair and equitable way administering policies and practices. I give a lot of credit to the state, and in particular, Senator Smith and all of Delegate Luedtke's colleagues who did some heavy lifting here to implement laws that I think are going to make a really big difference. We are in a bit of a state of transition right now because right now, local police jurisdictions are figuring out exactly how to implement those laws. And you throw on top of that the policies that the county has enacted, and they are trying their best and in a reasonable fashion to sort through all of this. I mentioned recruitment and retention issues in the area of mental health. Oh my goodness, we are having significant recruitment and retention issues in the area of first responders. And it's incumbent upon all of us to be reasonable here and try and provide support to the men and women, who sacrifice so much. Our county has done a really good job over a number of different years. We're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and we have a long way to go. But I'd put our police department up against any other in the country as it relates to training and the educational requirements to be on the force to begin with, the programs and services and interactions they have with the community. There's a lot to build off of, and that's what we're going to need to moving forward. So in response to your question, Todd, we're in a state of transition in the implementation of the myriad of policies that we've enacted, but on a parallel track, we're also working on addressing those recruitment and retention issues, because we can have all the greatest policies in the world, but if the right people are not taking these jobs, we're back to square one.
Right. I hear you on the need that we still have, we've made some progress. We have a way to go on criminal justice reform. Interestingly, I was speaking with a guidance counselor in my daughter's middle school, and she was talking about the developmental challenges among boys. We were talking about boys specifically, and we talked about how some kids have just emotionally regressed because of the pandemic and the lack of socialization and contact. And I just wanted to add one other thing, Gabe, before I give you each last 1 minute to speak on any closing remarks, and then Todd can close it out. You should know that last year, the county council, very much under Andrew's Friedson's leadership and Gabe's leadership, created a $700,000 grant program that provides up to $20,000 per institution to pay for operating costs for security, which is so important because there's money on the federal level, and there's 2 grant programs that JCRC was instrumental in establishing at the state level that provides capital funding for synagogues and for schools, but the real ongoing draining expense is the cost of hiring off-duty police officers. And I can tell you that of the 54 institutions in Montgomery County that we can apply, I think 46 applied for funding from that pool. So I'm giving you guys fair warning now that I'm coming out to lobby you guys to double the size of the fund, because I don't even think, or because there is so much need out there to provide security from anti-Semitism and from a terrorist attack. And we know that if there's going to be a terrorist attack, it's going to be a lone wolf. It's somebody who, and we know somebody who is self-radicalized. That's the profile. So first of all, I want to thank you guys both. I think you're extraordinary representatives. Eric, would you like a minute to close? Gabe, you can take a minute to close, and then I'm going to hand it on whatever you want to talk about. And then I'm going to hand it over to Todd and give my colleague and friend the opportunity to close tonight's evening. So I'm done, and thank you very much for being here. First Eric, then Gabe, then Todd.
Oh, thanks, Ron. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the chance to talk to everyone. I'll just close by addressing one of the last questions. Jody had also submitted a question asking what the legislative session is going to look like, and I'll say one of the few upsides of the pandemic has been that it's forced the legislature in Annapolis to become more transparent and open and accessible than ever through the use of technology like what we're using right now. So this coming legislative session, we are going to maintain, and I and other members of the delegation have been fighting to keep the ability for people to testify remotely as a way to make sure they can maximize participation. It's hard for somebody to take off work and spend 4 hours in a hearing room in Annapolis. It's easier if they're sitting at their desk. So please engage with the process. Please reach out to us if there are issues that you're concerned about. Figure out who your local legislators are, send them emails, sit down with them at your local Panera Bread and tell us what you think, because we're here for you. So thank you very much.
Ron, I'm going to end where I started by thanking the JCRC and all of you for your continued leadership. I've learned in 16 years of public service that we have an extraordinary government here in Montgomery County that sets a very high bar in terms of its programs and services and output. But government cannot and should not ever be in a position to do their work alone. And it's through partnerships with you all that we can expand our reach and more effectively reach our communities in ways that are frankly saving lives and are critically important moving forward. The last 2 years have been disorienting, exhausting, and tragic in many ways, but I'm actually starting to focus on hope and what lies on the horizon. There's political will to address some system building that we have needed to do for generations. And so I'm actually optimistic that we're going to come out of this stronger than we were before it all started. So thank you all again so much. This has been a great conversation. And of course, my good friend Eric, it's been great seeing you too. And I look forward to seeing you again in person soon. Thanks.
And I just want to add, Eric, Gabe, in any way that the Jewish community can help you with your priorities, we are happy to be not just an advocate for our own needs, but we are an advocate for the needs of the community as a whole, and are more than willing to engage in helping you with your legislative priorities as well, which we share with you. Thank you for your generosity of spirit and your great service. Todd, please, to close.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you, Delegate Luedtke and Council Member Albornoz. This has been great, and we really appreciate your time and expertise with us today. But more than anything, we really appreciate your deep commitment to Montgomery County, its citizens, among them our Jewish community, and our priorities. We look forward to many more years of friendship and partnership with both of you. We invite you all to join us on Tuesday, December 7th at 8:15 for our second webinar, where we'll be joined by Senators Ben Cardin and Chris Van Hollen to discuss federal legislative priorities. Please enjoy your afternoon. Happy Hanukkah and stay well.
Thank you both.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Eric.